I still remember the first time I laid eyes on the abandoned asylum. It stood at the edge of town like a wound that had never healed. A sprawling structure of crumbling brick and broken windows that seemed to swallow the light around it. The locals in Duskfield never spoke of it openly. They would change the subject, lower their voices, or even cross themselves when the asylum was mentioned. To outsiders, it was just another relic of the past, one of those forgotten institutions scattered across America where patients were once left to rot. But to the people here, it was something more, something alive, something that had never truly closed its doors. I was 22, reckless, and convinced that ghosts were nothing but stories told to keep children from wandering into dangerous places. My friend Marcus was the one who first suggested we should go inside. He was obsessed with abandoned buildings, always dragging me into old factories, collapsing farmhouses, or derelict schools. But the asylum was different. Even Marcus, with his usual bravado, whispered when he brought it up. "They say the basement's still locked," he told me one night at the diner. The overhead lights buzzed, and the smell of burnt coffee clung to the air. "No one's ever gotten inside. Whole wings are sealed up. Some of the orderlies just vanished during the last year it was open. People say their screams echo down there at night." I laughed it off, but I couldn't deny the shiver that crept up my spine. The asylum had always been a shadow in the back of my mind. Growing up in Duskfield, you couldn't escape the stories. Kids dared each other to run up and touch the rusted gate. Marcus brought his camera and a flashlight that looked like it belonged to a police officer. I brought nothing but a nervous laugh and a jacket that didn't keep out the wind. The asylum loomed before us as we pushed through the overgrown weeds. The gate had long since rusted off its hinges, and the path beyond was swallowed in darkness. My boots crunched on broken glass and dead leaves. The building itself stretched up with jagged lines, its roof partially caved in, its walls scarred with graffiti standing there. I couldn't help but feel small. The asylum wasn't just a building, it was a presence. The silence was heavy, broken only by the wind that seemed to moan through the broken windows. "You ready?" Marcus asked, his voice a little too loud, too forced. I nodded, though my throat was dry. The front doors groaned when we pushed them open. They hung crooked on their hinges. The wood swollen with age and rot inside. The air smelled of mold and rust. The beam of Marcus's flashlight cut across peeling paint, water stains, and an endless hallway that seemed to stretch into blackness. Our footsteps echoed in a way that made the walls feel closer, as though the asylum itself was listening. I told myself it was just acoustics, just the way sound carried in an empty building, but deep down, I felt the weight of unseen eyes. We wandered through the first floor, past the old reception desk, past doors that hung open like broken jaws. Wheelchairs sat abandoned in corners, their wheels rusted, their seats covered in dust. On one wall, faded letters spelled out Ward C, though most of the paint had peeled away. "Man, this is perfect," Marcus whispered, panning the camera across the hallway. "This place is like a movie set," but it didn't feel like a set. It felt lived in, not by people, not anymore, but by something else. Something that didn't want us there. As we explored deeper, I noticed the temperature dropping. My breath clouded in front of me, though the night outside had been cold, not freezing. The walls were damp, and when I brushed my fingers against the peeling paint, it crumbled like ash. We passed through room after room. Some still had beds, their mattresses torn open, stuffing spilling out like entrails. In others, broken cabinets and overturned chairs littered the floor. The smell of mildew grew stronger, mixed with something else, something metallic, faint, but unmistakable. Blood. I shook the thought away. It was probably just rust, I told myself. Old pipes, corroded metal, that had to be it. We took the stairs slowly, each creak of the wood echoing into the void below. The smell grew stronger, damp and sour, like old earth and decay. My skin prickled, and I felt the urge to turn back. but Marcus's excitement pushed us forward. At the bottom of the stairs, the hallway was narrower, the walls closer. Our flashlight beams danced across rusted pipes, crumbling plaster, and doors that were bolted shut with heavy chains. Each door was marked with faded numbers, B1, B2, B3. Something scratched from behind one of them, just faint, but real, a slow, dragging scrape that froze me in place. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. Marcus swallowed hard but forced a laugh. "Probably rats, but rats don't whisper." And I swear God help me, I heard it again. A voice, low, wet, and muffled, seeping through the cracks of the door. A voice that didn't belong to anything human. The whispering clung to the air like smoke, curling through the cracks of the chained door. I froze, the blood in my veins turning to ice. For a moment I thought Marcus would hear it too, but he just shook his head and smirked, though his grip on the flashlight tightened until his knuckles turned white. "Rats," he said again, though his voice cracked, betraying the confidence he was trying to project. "Big ones. You know how these places are." But it wasn't rats. I knew the sound of vermin. This was different, wet, deliberate, almost as if the words were trying to form but never quite did. I leaned closer, against every instinct screaming in my skull, and pressed my ear near the cold middle of the door. The whisper came again, softer this time, almost tender. I couldn't understand the words if they were words at all, but I felt them. They crawled under my skin, slithered into my mind, and for an instant I wasn't in that basement anymore. I was somewhere else, a narrow room with peeling green paint. A bed bolted to the floor, a figure strapped down, eyes wide with terror. A shadow leaning over them, whispering into their ear. Just like I was hearing now, I jerked back, gasping. My heart hammered against my ribs. Marcus frowned. "You okay, man?" I nodded quickly, though my whole body was trembling. "Yeah, just." The air grew colder the deeper we went. My breath fogged in front of me, swirling in the flashlight's beam. Somewhere above, water dripped steadily, each drop sharp as a ticking clock. Then, faintly, I heard it again, not a whisper this time, a sob. A broken, gasping cry that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Marcus froze. "Tell me you heard that." I swallowed hard. "Yeah, I heard it." We stood there in the narrow corridor, hearts pounding, the sound of the sobbing weaving in and out of the pipes like a living thing. It rose and fell, sometimes close, sometimes distant, always shifting, always moving just out of reach. "Someone's messing with us," Marcus muttered, though his voice was thin, unconvincing. I shook my head. "No one else is here." But even as I said it, I wasn't sure. We pushed on, though every instinct screamed at me to turn back. At the end of the hallway, a heavy iron door stood slightly ajar. The chains that once bound it had been cut, jagged edges hanging loose. Marcus grinned nervously. "Looks like someone beat us to it." The door creaked as he pushed it open, revealing a wide chamber beyond. Our flashlights swept across cracked tiles and rusted metal tables. Strange symbols were scrawled on the walls in what looked like faded charcoal or maybe something darker. "This must have been some kind of operating room," Marcus whispered, filming every inch. "Damn, this is perfect footage." I barely heard him. My gaze was fixed on the far wall, where a mirror hung cracked and filthy. Its surface was streaked with grime, but as the flashlight beam slid across it, I thought I saw something move in the reflection, not a something else. A pale face, gaunt and hollow-eyed, staring back at me. I spun around. Nothing, just the damp, empty chamber. Holy shit, this isn't real. The sobbing shifted into words broken, fragmented, but clear enough to hear. "Help me," the voice was desperate, clawing. My knees went weak. I reached for Marcus, trying to pull him away, but he was entranced, leaning closer to the mirror as if drawn by some invisible force. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. I yanked at his arm. "Don't listen to it." But the mirror trembled, the cracks spreading like veins across the surface. The sobbing grew into a wail, or raw scream of pain that rattled the walls. And then silence. The mirror was empty again. Just our reflections staring back, pale and shaken. Marcus laughed nervously, though his eyes were wide. Okay, that was weird. But it's gotta be some kind of trick. Maybe, like, leftover wiring or something. But his voice didn't convince me. I could see the fear in him, the way his hands trembled. The way he kept glancing back at the mirror, as if afraid it would scream again. We left the chamber quickly, our footsteps going loud in the narrow halls. The sobbing didn't return, but the silence was worse, heavy, waiting. As we climbed back up the stairs to the first floor, I felt it. The asylum wasn't just old and abandoned. It was watching, listening, and now. It knew we were here. I woke with a start the next morning, unsure if I had even slept at all. My body ached as though I had been tensed all night, clenched in fear even as I lay on the stiff mattress. The morning light filtered through the broken blinds in weak, pale beams, doing little to chase away the lingering darkness in the corners of the room. For a moment, I tried to convince myself that the events of last night had been nothing more than a nightmare. The dripping, the whispers, the hollow stare of that woman by the window, my exhausted mind playing cruel tricks on me in an unfamiliar place. But when I swung my feet onto the floor, my blood ran cold. The boards beneath me were wet, not soaked, but damp enough that I felt it immediately through my socks. I looked down, and there it was again, a thin trail of moisture, snaking from the window to the middle of the room. Before it seemed to vanish into nothing, I backed away, my chest tightening. No, I whispered to myself, as if denying it could make it unreal. But the evidence was there, undeniable. Something had been in this room. Something had left its trace. I hurried into the hallway, nearly colliding with the landlord, Mr. Carson, who was walking slowly toward me with his hunched posture and pale, blotchy skin. He gave me a strange look, one that hovered between concern and suspicion. "Everything all right?" he asked, his voice rasping. I forced a shaky smile. Yeah, just didn't sleep well. Old buildings, you know. His lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Takes time to adjust. They hold memories." He let the words hang in the air a moment alone, then shuffled past me toward the stairs, his cane tapping the floor with each step. I watched him go, a chill running down my spine. The way he had said it didn't sound like a casual remark. It sounded like a warning. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I left the house, wandering aimlessly through the town just to avoid being inside. The streets were narrow, the buildings close together, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I stood out somehow. People glanced at me, some briefly, some with eyes that lingered too long. No one smiled. It was as if I had intruded upon a place that did not welcome strangers. By dusk, I found myself back at the house despite every fiber of my being urging me to keep walking, to check into a motel, to sleep in my car if I had to, but my belongings were there, and some stubborn part of me refused to be chased off so easily. That night, the house seemed louder. Every creak, every sigh of the woods sounded like footsteps. I tried to drown it out with my headphones, but even the music couldn't mask the feeling that the silence underneath was watching me. It was some time past midnight when I heard it again. The dripping, this time, it didn't stop. It grew louder, steadier, until it became a rhythm, like water hitting stone in some deep cavern. I sat frozen on my bed, staring at the door, my breath shallow. And then, without warning, the dripping ceased, only to be replaced by a voice. A whisper, so soft I thought at first it was the wind. But no, it was inside the room. "Get out." I jolted upright, heart hammering, scanning the shadows frantically. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking. There was no reply, just silence, and then sleep became an elusive stranger to me. Each night was fractured by sounds that didn't belong, scratches on the walls, faint knocks that seemed to travel beneath the floor, whispers that seeped in from the cracks. I tried convincing myself it was all in my head, fatigue and fear twisting reality, but every instinct screamed otherwise. On the fourth night, the house decided to reveal more. It began with the cold again, the same unnatural chill that crept into the marrow of my bones. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling when I heard it, a low, dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across wooden boards. It came from the hallway just outside my room. I sat up slowly, my heart pounding so loud it drowned out everything else. The dragging sound stopped abruptly. Silence pressed against me, suffocating, before the floor groaned with slow, deliberate footsteps. They approached my door. I couldn't breathe. My eyes locked on the thin strip of shadow beneath the doorframe, and that's when I saw them to dark shapes and moving, perfectly aligned with the door feet. Someone or something was standing right outside. Summoning a courage I didn't feel, I whispered into the silence, "Who's there?" The feet didn't move. Instead, I heard a whisper, not from the hallway, but right beside my ear, "Get out." I stumbled back, hitting the wall. My pulse hammered as the doorknob began to turn slowly, squealing as though resisting. I scrambled for the lamp on the nightstand and flicked it on the light burst across the room, warm and fragile, but enough. The footsteps retreated instantly, fading into nothing. The next morning, exhaustion wrapped around me like a shroud, yet something compelled me to search. I couldn't keep living in that suspended terror. I went into the hallway where I had seen the shadows. The boards creaked beneath my feet, and one section gave more than the rest. Kneeling, I ran my fingers along the scene. There was a gap, small but unmistakable, as though the floor hid something. I pried at it with a knife until a panel gave way with a sharp crack. Beneath the floorboards lay a narrow, dark cavity. A rush of air hit me damp, metallic, and old. Inside, I found scraps. A broken comb, strands of hair matted with dust, and what looked like the corner of a faded photograph. I pulled the picture free. It was torn, showing only half of a family, a woman with hollow eyes, clutching a small child whose face had been scratched out violently. And scrawled on the back in shaky ink were words that made my stomach drop. "The floor remembers, the walls keep their secrets." That night, the whispers returned. Louder this time, clearer. They weren't just random murmurs, but voices calling names I didn't know, and beneath it all, the sound of something scratching closer now, as if trying to claw its way out from beneath the floor where I had pried it open. I pressed my hands over my ears, but the voices bled through. "You shouldn't have looked." The next night, the storm returned. It was louder, more violent, as if the sky itself wanted to peel the house apart. Windows rattled, the old walls groaned, and the lights flickered with each crack of thunder. I sat in the living room, staring at the photograph I had found, the one with the pale woman and the blurred figure hovering behind her. My heart refused to let me tear it up or burn it. Some instinct told me the picture was a key. The air thickened around me, damp and heavy, and soon I heard it again, those footsteps upstairs. Slow, dragging, relentless. I rose from the couch, flashlight in hand, though I already knew light would not protect me. Something was leading me to the second floor. The staircase creaked under my weight, every step echoing like a warning. When I reached the landing, I froze. At the far end of the hall, a door that had always been locked now stood wide open. Cold air poured from inside, carrying with it the smell of rot and mold. It was the attic. I stepped closer, my breath shallow and uneven. Inside, the darkness seemed alive, pulsing. My flashlight beam revealed old trunks, broken chairs, and torn curtains piled like corpses. But in the center of the room was something else, a circle drawn crudely on the floorboards. "You shouldn't be here." The photograph slipped from my hands, fluttering into the circle. And then she appeared, the pale woman from the photo, taller now, her eyes black holes that swallowed all light. Her mouth stretched too wide, revealing jagged teeth like broken glass. She hovered above the circle, limbs twisted and jerking as though pulled by invisible strings. I stumbled back, hitting a trunk, but I couldn't look away. She opened her mouth, and the sound that came out was not a scream but a chorus of voices, men, women, children, all shrieking at once. The attic door slammed shut behind me. Something brushed my shoulder, cold fingers. Clutching, my flashlight died. In the pitch black, I felt the air move as if dozens of bodies were crawling around me, breathing, touching, whispering. And then, directly beside my ear, a voice rasped, "We've been waiting for you." The morning sun filtered through my blinds, though its warmth did nothing to thaw the cold that had settled in my chest. I hadn't slept. I had sat rigid in the armchair, staring at the front door, convinced something waited just beyond it. My phone was still dead, its black screen like a sealed eye. I tried the charger again, but the device didn't respond. The silence of my apartment was suffocating. By mid-morning, I forced myself outside. The streets looked unchanged, ordinary even, but I noticed subtle oddities. A crow perched on a stop sign didn't move when I walked past. Its glassy eyes followed me until I turned the corner. An old woman on her porch seemed to mutter at no one, her lips moving in a frantic prayer. Every face I passed seemed tight, drawn, avoiding eye contact as though carrying a shared but unspoken fear. I went back to the library. The air was heavy, smelling of mildew and dust. As I crossed the reading hall, the floorboards groaned louder than I remembered, like they protested my weight. I found Mr. Harlan, the librarian, hunched at his desk, recalling how I had already spoken his name more than once, how I had thought of him obsessively since the night in the hallway. My mouth went dry. "It's too late then," I said quietly. Harlan's hand trembled as it clutched mine across the desk. "Then you must not be alone. If you face him alone, he takes more than your life. He takes your shadow, your voice, your very shape. You become part of him." His grip was icy, desperate. Before I could reply, the overhead lights flickered, then went dark. The library plunged into shadow somewhere in the stacks. A book fell with a hollow thud. Harlan's head snapped toward the sound, his face pale with terror. "He's here," he whispered. I turned, heart pounding, but the rows of shelves yawned empty and dark. Yet the silence had weight, a pressure building in my ears, as though the building itself were holding its breath. A shape moved between the shelves, to tall, to thin, gliding instead of walking. The hollow man, I froze. His face, or what passed for one, was a blank stretch of pale skin, featureless, shifting like fog trapped in flesh. His limbs were long, bent wrong, arms trailing nearly to the floor. His head tilted as though listening, and though no eyes looked at me, I felt the weight of his gaze pressing down like a hand on my chest. "Don't move," Harlan hissed, yanking me behind the desk. He fumbled inside a drawer and pulled out a small silver bell, its handle carved with strange runes. He shook it once, and the sharp metallic chime rang out. The hollow man jerked, its body convulsing as if the sound tore through it. The blank face rippled, the mouth stretching open where there had been none. When I stumbled outside into the daylight, the world looked brighter but wrong. Shadows stretched unnaturally long, twitching like they had minds of their own. My own shadow lagged behind me by a fraction of a second, mimicking me imperfectly, a delayed echo, and when I whispered Harlan's name, my shadow turned its head before I did. The storm did not let up that night. Rain lashed against the thin walls, seeping through cracks like icy fingers, and the thunder rolled with a violence that rattled my bones. I sat hunched in the farthest corner of my room, the lantern burning low, its flickering flame casting grotesque shadows that seemed to crawl across the floorboards. Every creak of the house set my teeth on edge. Every gust of wind made me flinch, waiting for the next thing to appear. I had long since given up on the idea of sleep. Instead, I watched the door, half expecting it to open on its own. It did not, but something else came. A sound soft at first, almost a whisper, slid beneath the roar of the rain, a low, hollow thumping like footsteps. But not from the hall, from beneath me, the basement. My breath caught, and I leaned forward, straining to hear. The thumping grew louder, more insistent, until it was no longer muffled. It was as though something down there had decided to stop hiding. I forced myself to stand, my knees trembling, and took the lantern with me. The light shook in my hand as I crept toward the trapdoor in the kitchen floor. I had avoided it until now, too afraid to face whatever was below, but if the sound was not going to stop, neither could I. I crouched before the trapdoor, my heart hammering as the noise pounded up through the wood. With a trembling hand, I pulled the rusty latch. It gave way with a groan that echoed through the room. And then silence. I waited, listening, but the sound was gone. The storm outside seemed distant now, as though the house itself held its breath. Then I saw it, a book, massive and ancient, bound in a material that looked sickeningly like skin. It lay open, its pages filled with the same twisted symbols carved into the walls. The ink shimmered as though still wet. I should have fled. I should have turned and never looked back, but as I approached, the air around me seemed to pulse, and the symbols began to writhe, moving across the page as though alive. My lantern flickered, nearly dying. In that moment of dim light, I felt it. Someone or something stood behind me. The air turned to ice. I could not breathe. Slowly, dread choking me, I turned. The lantern flared once more, casting its light across the chamber. There was nothing there, nothing except a shadow. It clung to the wall, darker than the rest. Its shape vaguely human, but wrong, elongated, jagged, its head bent at an impossible angle, and then it moved. The shadow detached itself from the wall and began to crawl toward me. I staggered back. Sheriff Thomas could sense it, something in the air that wasn't just paranoia. The killings had stopped, but that only made the silence worse. A predator that went quiet was far more dangerous than one that roared. One evening, while patrolling the outskirts of town, Thomas noticed something strange. The trees near the old mill carried deep scratches, long and uneven, as though something or someone had dragged a blade across the bark. He leaned closer with his flashlight, the beam trembling slightly in his grip. Blood, still fresh, seeped from the grooves. His instinct screamed at him to leave, but instead, he pressed forward. The mill had long been abandoned. Its roof half collapsed, windows shattered into jagged teeth. Every townsperson whispered that the killer used this place as a hideout. Thomas had no proof, only dread inside. The air smelled of rust and mold. Rats scurried across broken planks, squealing as they vanished into shadows. The sheriff moved slowly, his boots crunching against glass shards. That was when he saw it, a chair in the center of the mill, tied with frayed ropes. A crude mockery of an interrogation seat. Stains darkened the wood, stains that could only be blood. Thomas's chest tightened. He ran his fingers along the ropes, and they were still warm. Whoever had been here recently. Then came the sound, a faint creak above him. He froze. His eyes darted toward the rafters, and for a split second, he swore he saw movement, a shadow slipping away into the darkness. His hand went to his revolver. "Show yourself," he barked, his voice echoing in the hollow building. No answer. Just the silence, thick and suffocating, and then a whisper. It wasn't a voice in the air, it was inside his head. The silent stalker was toying with him, and the game had only just begun. The hospital had become a labyrinth of shifting corridors and flickering shadows. I felt as though the building itself was alive, rearranging its bones to trap us within its malignant design. The air was damp, heavy with mildew, and carried the faint metallic tang of blood, as though the walls were bleeding unseen. Sarah clutched my hand tighter as we moved cautiously down the hallway. Every creak of the floorboards beneath our feet echoed like a scream in the silence. My flashlight beam danced nervously across cracked tiles, peeling wallpaper, and doors that seemed to breathe with a faint, rhythmic pulse. We stopped when we reached a heavy steel door, slightly ajar. Beyond it, we could hear whispers low, rasping voices that merged into a chorus of distorted chants. They weren't speaking English, nor any language I recognized. It was guttural, almost inhuman, as though the building itself was chanting to us. I pushed the door open, and the beam of light fell into what used to be an operating theater. Rows of rusted seats circled a surgical table at the center. The table wasn't empty. A body lay there, covered in a white sheet, but the fabric moved as though something beneath it still breathed. The whispers grew louder. Sarah let out a trembling gasp, and before I could stop her, she pulled back the sheet. What we saw wasn't human anymore. The figure's flesh was gray, stretched tight over bone, and its chest rose and fell with slow, labored breaths. Its eyes shot open milky, blind, yet fixed on us, and then it spoke. Its cracked lips parting to release words that echoed from the walls rather than its throat. "You are late, the ritual begins." The seats around the theater filled in an instant, though we hadn't seen anyone enter. Figures materialized, nurses in stained uniforms, doctors with skeletal faces, patients bound in bloody bandages. They sat silently, their heads turning toward us as one, their hollow eyes gleaming with cold recognition. Sarah screamed and clung to me, but I couldn't move. My body felt paralyzed, my muscles stiff like stone. The chanting resumed, filling the air until it vibrated in my chest. The figure on the table began to convulse, its body twitching and twisting in unnatural angles, as though bones were breaking and reforming beneath the skin. The lights above us flickered violently, then burst, plunging us into strobing flashes of light and darkness in those brief intervals. The room seemed to shift walls closer, the figures advancing, the operating table dripping with black fluid that smelled of rot and sulfur. Finally, the figure sat up fully, its jaw unhinged with a sickening crack, stretching wider than any human mouth should. From its throat poured not words, but a scream that was layered, infinite, as though thousands of trapped voices were howling at once. The audience of the dead joined in, their mouths opening in perfect synchronization, their screams merging with his. The scream was burrowing into my skull, rewriting my thoughts, making me see flashes of things I shouldn't see: rituals, blood sacrifices, the hospital drowning in an ocean of red. And then, just as I thought my sanity would shatter silence, the room emptied, the seats were bare. The operating table was clean, as if nothing had ever been there. Sarah was trembling in my arms, her eyes wide with terror, but the silence wasn't comforting. It was heavier than the screams, and deep within it, I could feel something watching us, waiting for the next move. The following night descended heavier than the ones before. The air in my apartment felt saturated, as though it had been steeped in the presence of something unholy. My windows rattled with each gust of wind, even though outside the night was still, unnaturally quiet. I barely slept, waking every hour to the faint creak of my floorboards. I reached for my phone, hoping the dim screen would provide some illusion of safety, but the moment I unlocked it, I saw something impossible. My reflection in the black glass of the screen did not mimic me. Its eyes were wide, mouth twisted into a grin, and it leaned forward, closer, as if pressing against the inside of the device, desperate to break free. Terrified, I dropped the phone onto the floor. It landed with a dull thud, the screen shattering into spiderweb cracks. But even through the fractured glass, the reflection still stared back, smiling. The pounding at the door stopped abruptly. Silence swallowed the room. For a long moment, all I could hear was my pulse hammering in my ears. I thought maybe it was over until I noticed the door handle. It was turning, slowly, carefully, like someone didn't want me to notice. I bolted upright, heart racing, and grabbed the nearest object I could use as a weapon, an old metal lamp. The handle clicked, the latch slid free. My stomach churned with terror. The shadow advanced, and for the first time, I saw its outline, long limbs bent at unnatural angles, its head tilting in jerks, as though it was learning how to mimic the movement of a man. The stench of damp earth and rot filled the air. I backed away until my spine hit the wall. My hands shook, useless against the creeping form. The only thought that screamed in my mind was escape. Without thinking, I lunged for the window, shoved it open, and felt the cold air rush in. Behind me, the shadow let out a guttural laugh that rattled the walls. I didn't dare look back. I climbed out and dropped into the alley below. The impact knocked the air out of me. The storm outside roared like an angry beast, shaking the windows of the hospital as if the building itself were alive. Shadows twisted unnaturally along the hallway, lengthening and shrinking like they were breathing. My chest burned, every breath shallow, but I forced myself onward. I had reached the heart of the hospital, the old surgical theater. The doors creaked open with a push, revealing rows of rusted chairs rising in a semicircle, facing a central table drenched in dust and dried stains that still looked too red, too fresh above it. The massive operating light flickered, casting bursts of white that illuminated the walls. And there, standing at the table, was him. The surgeon. His mask was stitched into his face, the fabric now part of his rotting flesh. The scalpel in his hand gleamed under the intermittent light. But what froze me wasn't him, it was the people lying on the floor around him, dozens of them. Some had faces I recognized, fellow interns, the janitor, even townsfolk. Their eyes were wide open, but their bodies unmoving, suspended between life and death. "You came," the surgeon rasped, his voice like metal grinding against bone. "Good, every hospital needs its sacrifice, and you've been chosen." He moved toward me, scalpel raised, and the air turned ice cold. My instinct screamed at me to run, but there was nowhere left to go. I remembered the journal I had taken earlier, the one belonging to Dr. Holloway, the hospital's last director. His notes were frantic, desperate, but there was one detail that stuck with me. The curse can be broken only if the instrument of death is turned against its master, the scalpel. He lunged, I dodged, the blade grazing my arm, hot blood spilling instantly. Pain shot through me, but adrenaline pushed me forward. I grabbed a piece of broken glass from the floor and struck his wrist. The scalpel clattered onto the operating table. I didn't think. I dove for it, my fingers closing around the icy handle. The surgeon shrieked, lunging again. But this time I drove the blade upward straight into his chest. The scream that followed wasn't human. It was 1,000 voices at once, all crying out in agony, shaking the theater walls until plaster rained down. The surgeon's body convulsed, his mask tearing away to reveal a void of darkness where his face should have been. Then he exploded into a cloud of ash and shadow that scattered across the room before vanishing completely. And then silence. The bodies on the floor gasped. One by one, their eyes blinked. Breath returned, and they slowly stirred as though waking from a nightmare. The curse was breaking. The hospital groaned like it was sighing its last breath. The walls trembled, lights shattered, and the building itself seemed ready to collapse. I staggered out with the survivors, dragging my aching body toward the storm's fading light. Behind us, the hospital crumbled into itself.